Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Monday everybody. I hope you had a restful weekend and I wish you all a productive week ahead. First up, let's discuss developments in the Taiwan Strait. It was a very busy week last week and this week looks to be no slow news week either. A bipartisan delegation of US lawmakers arrived in Taiwan yesterday, Sunday, a day after China ended its biggest military exercise in a year around the island. The delegation was led by Representative Michael McCall, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. It was the first congressional group to visit Taiwan since the inauguration of President Lai Ching-te, or William Lai, last Monday. Lai is to meet with this delegation today, Monday, to discuss peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific, Taiwan-US trade relations, and other issues. On Saturday, the US State Department criticized Beijing for military provocations for staging the military exercises around Taiwan, threatening blockade. People's Liberation Army on Thursday launched the military drills and encircled the entire island. We discussed these drills at length last week, so we won't unpack them again here. Evidently, these US lawmakers were not put off by the military drills, and interestingly, neither were the markets. Taiwan's benchmark stock index saw its 5th straight weekly advance, and its champion technology giant, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., TSMC, hit a record high. Nevertheless, both Chinese and international analysts agree that the drills were almost certainly an intentional blockade simulation. Indeed, as we covered last week, several high-profile Chinese military experts on state media expressed that these exercises were just that, with one Beijing-based advisor explaining to state media that the goal was to make Taiwan a, quote, dead island, end quote. A Bloomberg economics note published today expressed, quote, a real blockade that cut Taiwan off from the world would choke off a significant portion of global semiconductor supplies, costing the world economy about $5 trillion, end quote. The analysts calculated about a 1 in 4 chance of a major crisis in Taiwan over the next 5 years. It could take several forms, from a customs inspection regime where Taiwan-bound shipping is selectively interdicted to a quarantine that features more aggressive screening. Quote, the most intense option is a traditional military blockade, where China potentially cuts off all air and seaborne traffic, end quote. A total Taiwan cutoff, along with the imposition of Western sanctions on China, would reduce global GDP by about $5 trillion or 5% in the first year. The team's modeling shows US GDP goes down 3.3% in the first year, while China's is hit by 8.9%. Quote, and that assumes that Taiwan, the US and its other allies don't raise the stakes militarily in retaliation to any such naval aggression, end quote. And that is quite a big assumption. Now, while we're on the topic of Taiwan, 2 more quick related updates. On Friday night, protesters took to the streets as opposition lawmakers pushed ahead with a bill intended to curtail the powers of the new president. Tens of thousands of people gathered outside the legislature in Taipei, with smaller demonstrations also being held across the country. The protesters, mostly DPP supporters, are concerned about legislation put forward by the opposition parties that would expand lawmakers' powers to investigate the government. Meanwhile, on Sunday evening, NVIDIA's president, Jensen Huang, landed in Taipei to attend a technology expo in Taiwan. Huang has frequently mentioned the critical role Taiwan plays in the global AI supply chain, as TSMC makes the bulk of the world's cutting-edge chips, including those designed by NVIDIA. A week ago, he expressed to US media, for example, quote, Taiwan is at the epicenter of the world's technology supply chain. The technology industry depends very heavily on Taiwan and continues to for some time, end quote. Next up, we move to the Chinese economy. According to the latest quarterly survey of household wealth and income released by researchers at the Southwestern University of Finance and Economics in Chengdu, the China Household Wealth Index survey, China's middle-class families remain cautious about spending, especially on property. The survey measures the spending plans of households with an average of 1.5 million yuan, $200,000 in combined property and financial assets. The index of spending expectations fell to 101.9 in the first quarter of this year, down from 103 in the fourth quarter of 2023. A reading below 100 represents a contraction. The latest reading is even lower than the 102.6 result for the second quarter of 2020, when COVID was biting very hard in the country. These trends are important for policymakers to follow, who are hoping to see stronger consumption to lift growth this year. The survey found that only 6.8% of households said they plan to buy property in the next 3 months, while 20.1% of households said they would wait and see. This seems largely in line with official housing data. We remember investment in China's real estate sector fell 9.8% year-on-year in the first 4 months of 2024, and the amount of floor space sold fell 20.2% in the same period. There were some bright spots in the numbers, however, albeit very slight ones. The survey report said that 62.3% of respondents were not optimistic about economic prospects in the next 12 months, down slightly from 66.4% 3 months earlier. But still the majority of people. Expectations of job stability were still in contraction at 98.3, thus below 100. Household debt across all income groups rose, particularly among low-income households. We have a few more economic updates to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, as always, it's a huge help if you can just hit that like button. Sharing and subscribing is also a huge help. It's the only way in which the channel can grow. And Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up for the economy, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin reports over the weekend that a shortage of empty containers is building in China as domestic manufacturers, such as electric vehicle makers, scramble to ship goods ahead of the imposition of high US tariffs and other potential trade restrictions. We remember 2 weeks ago the Biden administration announced tariff hikes on $18 billion worth of Chinese imports, about 5%, including EVs, semiconductors, lithium-ion batteries, and solar cells. Some exporters are now willing to pay more than $1,000 to get a 40-foot container, more than triple the price of the same period last year, they told the outlet. Meanwhile, the outlet explains that the ongoing Red Sea crisis led to a delay in the return of empty containers from overseas ports in April, straining supplies at some major export ports and shipping lanes in China, according to a report released last week by the Horizon think tank backed by the China Container Industry Association. Quote, "The shortage is still within control, and empty containers can still be shipped back relatively smoothly. The supply crunch will be significantly improved in September, or will show clear signals of improving by then." End quote. Meanwhile, Chinese financial media outlet Yicai reports that since the start of 2024, Latin America has emerged as the fastest growing region for Chinese exports, with 11.4% year-on-year growth in export value for the period between January to April. China's exports to Mexico rose 15.1% during the first 4 months, comprising over a third of the region's total, while exports to Brazil surged 24.6%, making it China's second largest Latin American export market. Many Chinese exports have been trying to find places to go. Rising tariffs in the US, concerns and probes in the EU, Japan and other places are pushing exporters to these smaller emerging markets. But every action has a reaction. One after another, Latin American nations are following in the footsteps of the US, Europe and others by imposing prohibitive tariffs on Chinese imports. In recent weeks, Mexico, Chile and Brazil have all hiked and in some cases more than doubled duties on steel products from China, for example. Brazil will also soon introduce a tariff rate quota system to stop predatory pricing of imported alloy. It's reported that last year's 62% surge in Chinese shipments is behind the measure. These developments are notable. As smaller nations, they are much more vulnerable to retaliation than the US and the EU. Plus, it undermines the relationships some of these Latin nations have built with China over the last several years. China has invested heavily in some of them to extract and import critical minerals. So these protectionist moves in Latin America go to show just how concerned many states are by surging subsidized Chinese exports. Quote, "In some ways, these developing countries are the better bellwether of global trade sentiment towards China. They suggest the protectionist walls against Chinese goods are going up in many desperate places, not just rich countries." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Monday, and I will see you all tomorrow.